So when I saw the first 3 episodes of Star Trek Discovery, I was very disappointed. It doesn't feel like Star Trek. It just doesn't give me Star Trek vibes. It reminds me of the really bad movies. And so I wasn't expecting to have a new Star Trek series that I would be thrilled about. And yet, the Orville is the new Star Trek that I am thrilled about. And I mean this very entirely seriously. No, not a drop of sarcasm. It's genuinely the closest to actual Star Trek I've seen on TV in years, and it's a fucking Seth MacFarlane spoof show. But it's really good. I'm really glad that I listened to some of my viewers who mentioned it in the comments, which kind of made me reconsider some of what I'd heard after the premiere of the first episode. And then I saw even more praise for it online, so I decided to check it out myself, and I watched the first 4 episodes, and it feels a lot like Star Trek. It looks so much more like Star Trek than the Discovery does, and that just made me so mad. I was sitting there and I was watching it, and I was watching fucking Seth MacFarlane as Captain Mercer walking down a hallway, and I'm looking at the shape of the bulkhead and the lighting, and I'm like, oh my god, this looks like Next Gen. This looks like a corridor in fucking Voyager. This looks like Star Trek. I get Star Trek vibes from this, holy shit. And you know, of course they've had to code everything, like the Federation's now the Union. And they've got some really fun, different alien species like the Mocklins that are basically the discount Klingons, but they have their own whole weird cultural thing surrounding gender and their reproduction with eggs, and the 3rd episode about a girl was a really interesting episode. It asked very Star Trek questions and answered them in a very Star Trek sort of manner, and it argued them in like a clumsy Star Trek version. And so the thing is, like, I would say it's not as, like, grand as Star Trek. It's basically a down-to-earth version of Star Trek where, you know, all the high and mighty ideals don't compromise, people just kind of being people. You know, it's kind of like a future where the people in the future aren't actually better than you. They have all the same vices, all the same kind of interests. You know, they joke about drugs and shit, which of course, like, you know, Next Gen and other Star Trek series kind of pretend for the most part that drugs don't exist. Like, you know, some drugs exist if the plot warrants it, but it's usually alien drugs because Earthlings don't do drugs anymore and things like that. So it was kind of fun to really see basically Star Trek without a lot of the hang-ups that Star Trek has around how it has to have a certain level of dignity. Yeah, the Orville has no qualms about that. The one problem I would say with it is they sometimes it's a little tonally dissonant because it feels like they don't quite know what they want to be. They don't know if they want to go full sincere. They don't know if they want to go full spoof. And so occasionally there'll be scenes where I think they'd be more effective if they just would, like, settle on sincere for the duration of the scene. Like, during the trial, there's a scene where Seth MacFarlane calls someone a dick in the 3rd episode, and it's not like it's particularly offensive, it just doesn't seem like that's what a starship captain would do in that situation. And because the show is sometimes trying to portray itself as sincere, I then am, like, asking myself, well, what would a starship captain actually do in this situation while I'm watching it? So it kind of frustrates me a little bit that it can't really seem to settle on the tone that it wants to go for. But other than that, you know, like, the episodes are consistently fun, the sci-fi feels like sci-fi, the ethical questions asked are interesting, and the plots are entertaining, and it's very episodal, and they kind of just romp along through space, and it just makes me think of Star Trek. And the ship design is cool and pretty, and the tone of it is all just very, very, like, whimsical Star Trek, and yeah, I was thrilled. So if you're looking for Star Trek, and you don't want to settle for Discovery, I would say the Orville is a great substitution with its own fun, interesting plots. And, you know, passable special effects, sometimes they're actually quite good, and then sometimes you can sort of see where they, like, ran out of the budget and it's not quite as good. But overall, I enjoy it. I think it's a really good series, and I am stoked to see more of it. The only thing I'm scared of is that part of it, like, is based on Seth MacFarlane's failed marriage with the first officer, and now they occasionally have bitter barbs back and forth, but it's more lighthearted. but I'm so scared that it's gonna eventually suffer from Seth MacFarlane syndrome, like Family Guy did, and like if the characters end up hating themselves and each other, it's gonna just be so ugly, and I don't think I'll want to watch that live action. So I barely want to watch it in Family Guy, to be honest. Like, the central hatred of Peter and Lois's relationship just tires me now. So I hope that it doesn't end up going that way with the Orville if the series goes on too long. For that, I'm like kind of projecting my own hang-ups with Seth MacFarlane. It doesn't seem to be a problem at this point. Some moments are kind of great where they acknowledge certain things, but where the characters are allowed to really advocate for themselves in fun sort of ways. Sorry, I know I'm a little stilted. I'm trying to avoid anything too spoilery. It's just a really fun series, and it feels so much more like Star Trek than Star Trek Discovery does. It looks so much more like Star Trek than Star Trek Discovery does. Even their uniforms look more like Star Trek uniforms than the Star Trek uniforms in fucking Star Trek Discovery. Like, it's incredible how much more Star Trek this show is. I was basically just sitting there watching it and just kind of like internally raging a little bit, because I'm like, this is what I want. This is what I've been looking for. A future set series that's not bound in any prequel nonsense, that does what it wants, that is allowed to explore and ask brand new questions and answer them. And so far, what they've executed, they've done rather beautifully. I think it still has its kinks to be worked out. I think it needs to settle on a tone, or at least like make the tone division between sincere and funny better, because again, I think they're making their own scenes a little less effective, but ultimately, it's great. Watch the Orville. The characters are fun, the effects and makeup are fun, the premises are really interesting, and if you miss Star Trek, and if the Discovery is just bumming you out, watch the Orville. I'll probably still continue watching Star Trek Discovery to see where it goes, but I've found my new Star Trek, and I'm really stoked for more episodes. So that's everything I have on this. Wiedersehen.